Royal Flying Doctor Service had an 85th anniversary halfway through this month. I was absolutely amazed at the depth of the Flying Doctor Service. They play a significant part in Western Australia medical services. There are nearly 300 people on staff. That's not in Australia, that's Western Australia. There are 15 aircraft in their fleet. The one at the top there is one pretty much financed by Rio Tinto. BHP Billiton supply a lot of money as well to keep the show on the road, as do we, taxpayers. The Pilatus, there's 13 or 14 of those giving service to people in the outback. There was a spread in the newspaper which gave fairly large coverage of the Royal Flying Doctor Service. There was a supplement in the West Australian 2 weeks ago. It told the story of what happened in Horse Creek some years ago. That's Horse Creek today. That's the old town and what's left of it. And in the old town is a headstone to James Darcy, known as Jimmy Darcy. Jimmy Darcy worked as a stockman on Ruby Plains Station. He was badly injured when he fell from a horse in late July 1917. It was 30 miles south of Halls Creek, and they took him to Halls Creek for some medical attention. The trip took 12 hours. When they got there, they took Jimmy to the postmaster, Mr. Tuckett. He was the only person in the district with first aid knowledge. He had a look at Jimmy and said, well, there's not much I can do, because he was not qualified to do very much at all, just first aid. And so he contacted Wyndham, but the doctor in Wyndham was out of town. He contacted Derby, the doctor was out of town. Remember, in those days there was no voice. It was all by Morse key, dots and dashes, from one end of the wire to the other, to a telegrapher who would interpret the dots and dashes. Jimmy Darcy had two brothers in Wyndham, and they set out when they heard the news that Jimmy was not well, and they rode 250 miles in 3 and a bit days. It was a rather marvellous feat, and it featured in the newspapers. On arrival, they discovered that their brother was seriously ill. Tuckett, not knowing what to do, contacted Perth, and the wire service went through to Perth GPO. In Perth, they got in touch with a Dr. Holland, who came into the GPO and communicated with Tuckett at the other end. The interpretation being done in Perth by a telegrapher onto a piece of paper. The doctor would interpret what he was being told and then feed back information which would go back in Morse code to Mr. Tuckett. Tuckett transmitted the symptoms, and the doctor decided that an operation was necessary. Tuckett objected and said, I might not be successful. And he said, well, if you don't do anything, the patient's going to die anyway, so you better do something about it. What had happened was Darcy had suffered a ruptured bladder, and so Holland gave instructions to Tuckett on how to perform an operation, a minor operation, to relieve the pain. It was unsuccessful, and therefore he said it needs a more serious operation. And so Tuckett performed a more serious operation, going right into the seat of the problem, and the operation took 12 hours. He had no anaesthetics. He only had a razor blade and a pocket knife. He had morphine, but that's not an anaesthetic. It knocks you out. They also used a bit of whiskey and potassium permanganate, because Connie's crystals was mixed up with water to be the disinfectant. And so Tuckett undertook the serious procedure following step-by-step instructions by Morse code from Perth. 7 hours. Jimmy was on the table, tied down, suffering the effects of whiskey and the pain. The operation was deemed successful for the first day or two, and then Jimmy's condition deteriorated. So Dr. Holland arranged to travel north on a ship. The trip was going to take 2 weeks on a cattle ship. He arrived in Derby and then in T-model Ford, horse and cart, made his way to Halls Creek where Jimmy Darcy was. Unfortunately, Jimmy Darcy had passed away the day before. So Jimmy's death focused attention on the problems of medical services in the outback. The news got to John Flynn over east, and this focused his attention on developing the area of medical service at Meadow. We've come a long way, haven't we? With an aircraft like that one there, as modern as tomorrow, and when you compare it to that, the problem that Jim Darcy had with really covered things. We can't go past talking about the Royal Flying Doctor Service without mentioning Robin Miller, Harry in the front row here, and Robin and I did our commercial night flying test on the same night. So I actually ended up in a bit of trouble with her. I flew the aircraft immediately before her, and the Royal Air Club changed its rules that you turn your fuel off after a flight. So I turned the fuel off, and Robin went out after me to do her test, and didn't check that the fuel was on, taxied just a couple of 100 metres out there, and stopped. She was advised by the testing officer to turn the fuel on, but when she got back, she wanted my jugular. In this modern day and age, the aircraft, VHRIO, has a flight aware system on board, and it plots real time where the aircraft is. And in this one, if you watch carefully, you can see that the route was to Christmas Island, but the aircraft on Wednesday afternoon, when I accessed it, was pretty well opposite Shark Bay. As well as having the real-time route displayed and knowing where the aircraft is, there is a printout down the bottom, and I've compressed that a little bit, taken out arrival and departure times. But if we look at this, we'll find that it left on the 26th of the month, left Perth Airport for Learmonth, then Learmonth to Christmas Island. 1 hour 34 to Learmonth, 2 hours to Christmas Island. When you compare that to the 2-week journey by Dr. Holland, we really are in clover, aren't we?